They were giants, covered in ice-thick fur, armed with tusks as long as a man's body. They ruled the tundra for millennia. And yet, somehow, against all odds, we hunted them. No claws, no fangs, just fire, stone, and something new. A mind that could remember, imagine, and plan. This isn't just a story of survival. It's the moment we became predators. The moment we defeated the impossible. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows for cinematic journeys into deep time. Like this video if you believe the past still echoes in us. And drop a comment. Was our first great victory also our first irreversible loss? Now, let's return to the ice. Before there were cities, before there were kings, before even the first spoken name, there was ice. And in that ice walked colossus, mammoths, mastodons, woolly rhinos, beasts too large for memory, too powerful for myth alone. They didn't roam like animals. They moved like mountains, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. Their tusks were longer than spears, their hides thicker than armor. And when they passed, the earth itself seemed to hold its breath. To the early humans, these giants weren't just danger, they were everything. Meat, warmth, bone, rope, and death if you got it wrong. To face one of them was not a test of courage. It was a fact of life, a necessity. You didn't hunt them because you wanted to. You hunted because if you didn't, you wouldn't survive the winter. But then, something shifted. A new kind of predator appeared on the frost. Not faster, not stronger, not braver, just colder. Colder in thought, colder in calculation. Homo sapiens. We were small, bare, unimpressive. But inside our fragile skulls burned something the giants had never faced. Imagination. We could wait. We could watch. We could plan. And that made all the difference. This was the beginning of a new kind of power. Not born in muscle, but in mind. We weren't meant to survive the Ice Age. Our bodies said as much. No claws, no fur, no armor against the cold. Just skin, bone, and breath that froze as it left the mouth. The world was brutal, and it didn't care if we lived or died. But we had something ancient. Something almost unnatural. Fire. It didn't come from us. We stole it. From lightning, from volcanoes, then carried it like a secret through endless nights. At first, it warmed us. Then it fed us. But soon, it began to think with us. We used it not just to survive, but to change the rules. We burned grasslands, not by accident, but by design. Flames swept across the plains, driving terrified herds toward cliffs. They didn't understand what was happening, but we did. We held torches, not just for light, but as weapons of chaos. We learned how to shape fear itself, to turn it into a tool. And in that flickering glow, we saw something terrifying. Not just the eyes of a beast, but the edge of what nature had allowed and what we were about to violate. Fire gave us more than warmth. It gave us power. Power over beasts. Power over fate. Power over the natural order itself. And once we saw what it could do, we never looked back. Out on the wind-scoured steppes of Eastern Europe, beneath layers of frost and time, archaeologists began finding something strange. Circles, not made of stone, but of bones. Massive bones, mammoth skulls, curved tusks still locked in position, spines, femurs, ribs as long as a man's body. And they weren't scattered by scavengers or time. They were arranged intentionally, symmetrical, repeating, man-made. At first, some thought they were shelters, others ritual sites. But the truth was colder, simpler, darker. They were traps, corrals of death, walls not to keep prey in, but to channel them in, to confuse, to corner, to kill. This was no random act of survival. These weren't men chasing food across the ice. They were laying blueprints, designing outcomes, turning open tundra into controlled slaughter. The hunters had become engineers. The game didn't stand a chance. This was the first time in history that man didn't wait for nature to provide. He forced its hand. He reshaped the land itself, not for shelter, but for conquest. In bone and blood, he drew a line across the earth. From here on, we decide who lives. In the quiet hills of Dolny Viestanice, what looks like a peaceful meadow hides something far older and far more brutal. Beneath the soil lie the remains of a battlefield, not between armies, but between man and beast. Hundreds of mammoth bones rest here, some shattered clean through, as if struck by overwhelming force. Others are scorched black, burned by flames that died out thousands of years ago. Scattered among the bones are flint tools, still sharp in places, spear points snapped in two, ashes from ancient fires, cold now, but once the center of planning, precision, and death. This was no scavenger's feast, no desperate ambush. It was something more deliberate, an execution ground. Dozens of mammoths killed in one place, not by accident, but by design. You could almost feel the coordination, the teamwork. One group herding, another waiting in silence. Each movement calculated, each step warfare. The men who stood here weren't just hunters. They were tacticians, thinkers, builders of death. And the mammoths, despite their power, despite their size, never stood a chance. This wasn't the triumph of strength. It was the triumph of strategy. We didn't just kill them, we outthought them. A mammoth could crush a man with a single foot. It didn't need to roar. It didn't need to chase. Its very size was a warning. You don't belong here. But power has limits. A mammoth couldn't chart a landscape. It couldn't read the wind. It couldn't lay a trap or teach its young how to avoid one. We could. That was the turning point. What we lacked in strength, we made up for in memory, in observation, in imagination. We saw patterns. We noticed behaviors. We remembered what worked and what failed. And, most importantly, we shared it. One generation showed the next. How to shape stone. How to read the herd. How to wait for the right moment, then strike with precision. That kind of knowledge didn't die with the individual. It lived on. It accumulated. And soon, we were building something far more dangerous than any weapon. A system of thought. The mammoth's power peaked at birth. Ours grew stronger with every passing season. Because we weren't just surviving, we were adapting. And for the first time in Earth's long and brutal history, an idea could kill. The greatest weapon ever wielded was the human mind. And once it was aimed, nothing, not even giants, could stop it. We weren't just hunters anymore. We had crossed a threshold, one that no beast could follow. We had become architects of death. Our ancestors didn't simply chase prey across the plains. They shaped the land to control it. They dug deep pitfall traps hidden beneath leaves and snow waiting for a heavy step. They rigged deadfall logs to swing or crash down with lethal force. They scouted narrow valleys where sound echoed, where there was only one way in and no way out. And they did it all without maps, without written words, just memory, gesture, and silence. They watched the terrain. They placed themselves like pieces on a board. And when the moment came, they struck as one. This wasn't hunting. This was warfare. Cold, methodical, intentional. The mammoth had strength. But we had coordination. And that made all the difference. Because no matter how massive your body, you cannot outfight a tribe that thinks like a single mind. We had evolved beyond instinct. We were no longer acting alone. We were organizing, planning, executing. And in that moment, something terrifying was born, not to the beasts, but to the world itself. A collective will, a species with purpose, not to endure, but to conquer. Across the vast reaches of Poland, Germany, and Siberia, beneath layers of soil and frost, lie the bones of giants, but not scattered in chaos, not broken by time alone. No, they lie in patterns, always the same species. Mammoths, and not just any mammoths, but prime-aged adults, the kind that yielded the most meat, the best hide, the strongest ivory. Always the same tools. Flint blades, sharpened spears, stone points fractured on impact, right where the ribs broke, and always near the same locations. Ancient campsites, fire pits, middens piled with cracked marrow bones. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't scattered survival. This was a campaign, a deliberate, multi-generational assault on the greatest prey the Ice Age had to offer. It was long. It was slow, and it was relentless. We didn't fight all at once. We fought season by season, herd by herd, generation by generation. And the Earth still remembers. You can trace the kill sites on a map like battlefields. They stretch like military routes, from river valley to valley, from forest edge to frozen plain. It wasn't just about food, it was about control. Because for the first time, one species wasn't just reacting to nature, it was strategically dismantling it. And in the bones left behind, in the scars carved into ancient landscapes, The message is still clear. We came. We hunted. We won. We don't know the place. We don't know the hour. But somewhere on a frozen plain or in a wind-swept gorge, the last mammoth fell, not to sickness, not to the slow toll of time, but to something far colder: strategy, a thrown spear, a misstep into a pit, a torch waved in the right place, at the right time. We'll never know the final blow, only that it came not from nature, but from us. That moment, quiet, almost invisible, was the end of one world and the brutal birth of another. The age of giants was over. For hundreds of thousands of years, mammoths ruled the tundra. They shaped migration routes, determined where predators thrived, and stood as monuments to untouchable power. But with one final kill, that era ended, and something new took its place. Apex. We were no longer prey, no longer shadows beneath their towering forms. We had become the dominant force, not by strength, but by thought, by fire, by patience. The tundra that once echoed with trumpets and thunder now echoed with our footsteps. We had outlived the impossible. And in doing so, we stepped into destiny. Because once the last mammoth fell, there was no more balance. There was only man. Beneath the frozen crust of the Arctic, where the ground has not thawed in tens of thousands of years, the dead are still waiting. Mammoth's entire, intact, preserved not in stone or ash, but in ice. Hair still clings to their bodies, matted, pale, curled by time. Skin still stretches across muscle. Even the grass in their stomachs remains, half-chewed, frozen mid-meal. It's not a fossil. It's a moment stopped. But among all the haunting details, one stands above the rest. Flint, wedges of human stone, still embedded deep in rib cages, still lodged in vertebrae, still sharp. A weapon that never left its mark behind, because the mark is still there. No rust, no decay, just impact, just intention. They didn't die by cold. They didn't collapse from age. They were hunted, and the proof is as clear today as it was 40,000 years ago. It's our signature, carved not in writing, but in trauma, in force, in design. Long after their breath stopped, long after the fire pits cooled, the bones remembered. And now the ice remembers too. Each time one of these bodies emerges from the permafrost, it brings a question with it. What did we leave behind? What have we forgotten? And what will still be there long after we're gone? We didn't just kill them, we erased them, one by one, herd by herd. Over generations of hunts, their thunder faded from the plains. The earth grew quieter, not by accident, but by design. And in that silence, something inside us began to shift. We had spent thousands of years surviving, fleeing, hiding, praying that the beast would not hear us, or see us, or smell our fear. But after the last mammoth fell, there was no longer anything to fear. And when you stop being prey, you start becoming something else. We no longer crept through the dark. We stepped into it, looking, seeking. We hunted not just to eat, but to dominate, to test ourselves against the world, and win. The mammoths were the first, but they would not be the last. We turned our gaze to forests, to rivers, to oceans, and soon no corner of the planet was untouched by us. This was our first victory, and with it came our first taste of control, of reshaping the world to our will. And once that door was open, we didn't close it. The Ice Age giants were not just victims of extinction, they were the first to fall in a much longer conquest. A conquest we're still carrying out, because the most dangerous thing we ever hunted wasn't the mammoth. It was the feeling we got when we won. The mammoths gave us more than meat, more than fat for firelight or hide for shelter. They gave us something human. They gave us story. Before language had form, before symbols had sound, their massive bodies moved through our memories like living gods. They were the first legends. Their hunts became tales whispered around fire. Their tusks became totems. Their bones, monuments, and through them, we learned how to remember. Some cultures buried ivory beside the dead, as if guiding the soul into the next world. Others etched their forms into cave walls. Massive beasts, captured in motion, painted not in celebration, but in reverence. These weren't just animals. They were symbols, bridges between man and mystery, between the known and the sacred. Their death wasn't just an event. It became ritual, a shared experience, a binding force. The hunters didn't just take life. They gave it meaning. They transformed survival into ceremony. In that transformation, the mammoth became more than prey. It became legacy, a figure that lived on not just in bones or DNA, but in the human imagination. Because long after the last trumpet faded, long after the last giant fell, we were still telling their stories. And stories become civilization. We didn't inherit the earth. We took it, not with roars or wars, but with something colder, more deliberate, more lasting. We took it with fire, with tools, with patience. We didn't storm the world. We crept through it step by step, changing it as we moved. The mammoths didn't die because we hated them. We didn't wipe them out of cruelty or conquest. They died because we were becoming something new, not animals struggling against the cold, not wanderers hoping the next herd would come. We were becoming civilization, and civilization always comes at a cost. It begins small, with a sharpened stone, a well-placed trap, a fire that burns through the night. But it ends with something bigger: control, territory, ownership. The mammoths stood at the edge of that transformation. They were the last to live in a world untouched by us, and the first to fall when we decided the world would answer to us. That wasn't evil. It wasn't even personal. It was inevitable. Because once we learned we could shape the future, we never stopped. We crossed a threshold from survival into power. And the first price paid for that power was a giant, We came from the dark, naked, cold, fragile, surrounded by giants, and yet we rose, not because we were the fastest or strongest, but because we saw patterns. We remembered. We hunted together. The Ice Age didn't make us. We made ourselves inside it. And when the last giant fell, something else stood up in its place. Us. At Prehistoric Shadows, we believe, history is not written with ink. It is written in ash, in scars, in DNA, and in the bones of the impossible. We don't just tell stories of the past, we excavate them, piece by piece, truth by uncomfortable truth. The megafauna may be gone, but the echoes of that hunt live on, in the firelight of our memory. Subscribe to Prehistoric Shadows for cinematic journeys into deep time, where extinction meets origin and man becomes more than myth.